Hey guys, it's me again, Eric here at Mountaintop 9, and tonight I'm going to be talking about two films by a really cool filmmaker that died back in 2007. His name was Roger Watkins, and the two movies I'm going to be discussing are Last House on Dead End Street and Shadows of the Mind. First, we're going to start with Last House on Dead End Street. Now, that film was shot in 1972, and the working title of the film was The Cuckoo Clocks of Hell. Now, that title was something that Roger Watkins got from a Kurt Vonnegut novel that he was reading at the time called Mother Night. And that's where he really liked the idea of that title. And unfortunately, because I think it's a cool title, no one else, I guess, really cared for it that much, because as the movie got cut down, another title that they tacked onto it, the distributors, was The Funhouse. Then, I guess, experimenting and seeing the success that Last House on the Left had had, the distributors, when they released it wide in the late 70s, they gave it the title Last House on Dead End Street. And that's what everyone knows the movie as now. And, you know, I think that's a kick-ass fucking title too. I don't think that Roger really didn't like that title because he felt it was just a shameless cash grab, you know, exploiting the Last House on the Left infamy, trying to steal from that well, and he also felt that it didn't represent his film anyway. It wasn't, you know, the movie's not about a last house on a dead end street, but whatever, it's still a catchy, evocative title, and I think it works. Now, I first saw this movie back in the 90s, and back then, Last House on Dead End Street was a movie that was talked about in it was a fabled type movie. It was a legendary type thing, an infamous type thing. It was something that people weren't sure, you know, there were whispers that maybe the murders in it were real. Maybe they were authentic murders. It wasn't like the movie Snuff, where when they had that tacked on scene, it was obviously phony. No, there was something about the way, for instance, the dismemberment and dissection scene late in Last House on Dead End Street. There's a scene where a woman is, you know, she's cut apart on a table, and the way it's shot is it's just very grainy, very grim, very dark, and it just lends an air of authenticity about it. You just feel grimy watching it. There was still a sort of excitement that surrounded this movie because it was such a sick puppy of a flick, and no one knew who any of these people were that starred in the movie, that made the movie, that wrote it. No one knew that Roger Watkins was the director. All they saw was the pseudonyms. You know, all of the actors took on pseudonyms. And not only the actors, but Roger Watkins went under the title, it says directed by Victor Janos. Well, who the hell is that? The musical supervision. You know, Roger was the one that did that, but it says Claude Armand. And on and on. It was all pseudonyms, so no one knew who it was that created this film, and that gave it an air of mystery and an air of danger. So there was a lot of excitement about it. And so going back then in the 90s, there was a thing where if you were a horror fan, you know, you went through your period where you saw movies like the Friday 13th films and on, but eventually you graduated deeper and deeper, going down into the sick underbelly of the horror genre. And that's where you would start to discover movies that were basically like rites of passage if you were a hardcore horror fan. Movies like Cannibal Holocaust, Necromantic, Make Them Die Slowly, Aftermath, stuff like that, Lucker, you know, that kind of stuff. Really grim, sick, exploitation, stuff on the fringes. And Last House on Dead End Street is one of those movies. It's a rite of passage. So when I saw it, I had read about it. People like Chaz Ballin had written little things here and there about the movie. When I finally was able to procure a copy of it, now keep in mind, I wasn't able to get the Sun Video. When I was going into fucking video stores in the, you know, late 80s when I was a kid, and then when I was growing up in the 90s, I don't remember ever seeing the Sun Video Last House on Dead End Street on the shelves. And I went to video stores, you know, back then, they had great selections. Lots of cool horror titles, lots of stuff that you wouldn't even imagine would be on the shelves. That, well, they were on the shelves back then, but I never saw Last House on Dead End Street, so it wasn't one that was printed up in abundance. You know, the shelves weren't overflowing with copies of this movie. So unfortunately, I don't have a nostalgic feeling when I see, you know, pictures of the Sun video case. It's an awesome little carton, but I don't have any nostalgia about it. But it's got great cover art. So when I finally managed to see the movie, how I saw it was on a bootleg copy, and it was like a Venezuelan bootleg, and it had Spanish subtitles. And of course the print was just murky as all hell, very hard in a lot of scenes to even make out what was going on, just very dingy, depressing to watch. I liked what I could make out. I really got a kick out of the Roger Watkins, out of his character, Terry Hawkins. You could see the intensity and the ferocity in his eyes. I liked him, his whole anti-hero character. You know, I identified with the leather jacket and with the cigarette dangling from his mouth, the sideburns, his hair, all of that stuff. He struck an imposing presence, and I really liked that right off the bat. As soon as he walks into frame there at the beginning, I got a kick out of that. Loved the killings at the end. But overall, watching it on that Venezuelan bootleg tape, and the way I got it in the mail, it just came in a black case and then just a regular VHS tape, and it just had a little sticker on it saying the title. I liked the movie from the first time I watched it, but it hadn't yet catapulted up to the top of my list. It was a movie I liked. I definitely liked it, and it definitely stayed in my memory banks, but I didn't watch that tape a lot after that. Moving on a little bit, in 2002, Barrel Entertainment puts out a DVD release of the movie. And man, let me tell you, this is it right here. And this thing was just packed to the rafters with great extras. You had there is a commentary track on here with Roger Watkins, and it's moderated by Chaz Ballin, and it's one of my favorite commentary tracks ever slapped on a DVD. It's just very honest, very forthright. I like the things that Roger Watkins says in here. For instance, when he's talking about this guy named Bernie Travis. Now, this guy is the one who slapped on, after the distributors got a hold of this movie, they slapped on this voiceover at the end saying Terry Hawkins and the rest of his crew were sentenced to so many years in prison and blah, blah, blah. You know, that stupid voiceover at the end. Well, I hate that voiceover, and so did Roger Watkins. He couldn't stand that because it went against the whole idea of the film. In his mind, Terry Hawkins and, you know, the crew that he was with and what they were doing, they were like the avenging angels. They were the ones that were taking this moral stance against these slimy producers, you know, these sleazy motherfuckers, and they were making them pay. It was like a statement against them. They were the corrupt ones. So anyway, Bernie Travis did the voiceover at the end. Well, I guess this guy killed himself in real life. And Roger Watkins says on this commentary, he's like, good fucking riddance. I'm glad he fucking did. You know, he's very honest. He was very, you get the feeling that this guy had great intensity for real. It wasn't just a screen thing. In real life, this guy said what he meant. And I like things like that. And this commentary track is filled with that. And Chaz Ballin is hilarious. I love listening to him. He's listening to him on this commentary. It's just like reading a Deep Red magazine or reading More Gore Score or one of the books, you know, any of his reviews. He speaks just like that, lots of jokes, he's very funny. Would have been great if he would have been on more DVD commentary tracks, just like how Media Blasters used Joe Bob Briggs. Would have been awesome if another company would have signed Chaz Ballin up while he was still alive and had him do lots of commentaries on movies, because he would have been great for that. But so it's got the commentary track. You've got Roger Watkins on the Joe Franklin show on here. Back in the 70s, there are tape recordings of him talking on the phone. Just cool stuff. And then on disc 2, there's this thing that someone shot in the 80s, and it's like a day in the life of Roger Watkins. and you see him at his house, and you see his lawn, and the grass is kind of grown up, and then they kind of drive to a cemetery, and it just kind of gives you a peer into his psyche and how he kind of thinks. Very artistic man. Seems like he really enjoys different aspects of artistic culture and theater and writing, but he has a very bleak sensibility, of kind of a depressive vibe to this whole extra, this thing where it shows him in a day in his life. It's kind of haunting, if you will, and I really liked it. It kind of made me feel a kinship with him as a person when I watched that, because I can kind of identify with him and just his thought process about things. So there are just really cool things on here. So I highly recommend you pick up this DVD release. Of course, it's long out of print, but you can grab them sometimes for 40 bucks or 50 or whatever. Now, Vinegar Syndrome is supposed to be putting out a release sometime here. I don't know when, but I know eventually Vinegar Syndrome is supposed to be putting out a Blu-ray or something, and I look forward to that. It'd be nice if they could find, you know, like the original 3-hour cut of the film or something like that. I'd get a kick out of that, but so far no news on them finding anything like that. Now, as far as the Sun Video tapes go, before I get into the plot and everything else, the only Sun Video copy I ever had, I didn't have it with a case. I was able to find one off of a collector that I met online at one point, and all I could get was the tape itself. The thing about the Sun Video releases, there were varying opening cards. Like one of them even had the Fun House as the opening title instead of Last House on Dead End Street. Also, the running times would vary on certain. It was so weird the way Sun Video put it out. They also even put out a beta release of it, and I think I know someone on Facebook that's got the beta, and that's super rare. And yeah, that Sun Video release, man, it goes, I think the cheapest it's ever gone in recent years is in the 600 ballpark. I mean, it's a very expensive, much sought after VHS release. But yeah, I'm really looking forward to the Vinegar Syndrome when that comes out. I can't wait for that one. But yeah, supposedly this movie had a budget of $1,500, but Roger Watkins spent most of that money on methamphetamine. I'm not sure how much money he actually spent on this film, but I know all of the actors worked for free. He didn't have to pay them. And yeah, he was pretty much drugged out of his mind on speed while making this movie. And it's not surprising, just the fucking intensity that this guy brings to the character. It's not surprising at all that he was just, I mean, he says in the commentary track for this movie that it was basically a state of psychosis at times with him being all hopped up on the speed. Before we get into the plot, I want to add that the seed of this movie was planted in Roger Watkins' mind when he went to a meeting and met this producer guy, and this guy said to him, he said, you know, Roger, you're a really sick looking fucker. You should make a movie about Charles Manson, because I bet that would make you some money to boot. So when Roger heard that, that planted the idea in his head. Because he had just recently read a book by a guy named Ed Saunders, and the book was called The Family, and that was about the Manson family. So that idea really clicked with him, and that's what got the wheels rolling on this flick. Because you can really see it when you watch it. There is a strong Manson-type vibe to this movie, for sure. Now that I've laid the groundwork and we've talked about what kind of brought this movie to fruition and kind of how it was birthed, let's just get right into it now and discuss the fucking plot. This sordid masterpiece of filth and decay begins by introducing us to the main character. Terry Hawkins is the anti-hero of Last House, and he walks into frame decked out in a leather jacket and puffing a cigarette. He just got out of prison after serving a long, hard year for selling drugs. Now that he's free again, he starts scoping out an old empty college building. You see, Terry is mighty pissed off at the world, and he wants to shoot some films, the likes of which no one has ever seen. And this creepy old schoolhouse with its old Gothic architecture would be the perfect setting. After finding the right shooting spot, he meets up with weirdo pals like the perverted Ken and sleazy cameraman Bill, and then he gathers a few chicks, and then they begin to make actual snuff films. In one movie, they murder a homeless guy, and this one proves to be a real hit with two dirtbag porn producers named Steve and Palmer. But these two numbskulls make a colossal mistake when they try to take credit for Terry's film, leaving him high and dry. Terry gets the last laugh on these fuckers though, because his magnum opus is just about ready to begin production, and Steve, Palmer, and his kinky ass wife are all set to be the stars of the show. So that's the basic story in a nutshell, and now that I've laid that out, let's get into some of the really gory and violent bits that this movie has to offer. The first victim of Terry Hawkins and his crew of miscreants is an old blind man. Terry strangles the poor prick. In another scene, a blonde chick gets branded right on her chest with a smoldering hot iron. After that painful transgression, Terry slashes her across the throat. Look at him holding up that gleaming knife. Such an indelible and timeless horror film image. Another sad sap gets stabbed and brutally beaten. You don't see any actual blade penetration, but you see his blood spray onto a white movie screen. And the scene is so damn intense that it's just as heavy-hitting as 5 other effects-heavy horror flicks combined. The movie is just so grimy and filthy at this point that you almost feel like swimming in a shit and chemical-laden sewer would be cleaner than watching this thing. And now we arrive at the grand central shock scene of this bleak bastard of a film. Terry and his friends walk into a room decked out in gloves and surgical masks. They have a woman tied down on a table, securely bound by rope. They start slicing into her face. Streaks of bright red blood run down her cheeks and her screams reverberate across the audio track. There's a hacksaw and other accoutrements of torture laying right beneath her feet. If you think this movie is going to pull any punches now, then you are sorely mistaken, partner. And I'll tell you what, if you have a weak stomach, then you better strap on your vomit bag and prepare thy anus. But the thing is, I'm not going to give minute piece-by-piece details on this legendary moment of stomach-churning horror, because I want you to experience the madness firsthand. But I will say this much, the blood does flow free and dark. And this poor dame is dismembered and disemboweled with savage brutality. Hey, you stop that right there, mister. You don't have a medical license. Why don't you come over here and give me a hand job? And last but not least, a man is forced to perform fellatio on a deer hoof, and then he gets a power drill put right through his fucking eye. I'll tell you what right now, that whole scene where Mrs. Palmer is disemboweled and cut apart on that table, it's so classic and it's seared into your mind once you see it, and it looks especially great on the cleaned up print that Beryl was able to put out. Now, when they're cutting into the stomach and pulling out the internal organs, they had to use a tape source for that part, but most of it's nice and cleaned up. And one funny thing I want to mention, there's a band called Deicide, and they put out an album called Once Upon the Cross. Whenever I see it, it reminds me of Last House on Dead End Street, and you'll know what I'm talking about. That overhead shot of Palmer laying there on the table, and all of the blood, okay, all over soaking into like the white fabric. It's just such a classic image, and it's so genius when you think about it, that Roger thought to shoot down that way and just show the whole thing the way it's laid out, and it's so nihilistic, and it's just such a terrifying thing to see. Another thing I want to say is the movie Flowers of Flesh and Blood. Now, that was obviously, there's no way they weren't influenced by Last House on Dead End Street. I mean, they had to have been. And the thing is that even though Flowers of Flesh and Blood has really great technical special effects, you know, the way they did everything in that, it still lacks the punch and the rawness of Last House on Dead End Street. So it doesn't have the same impact because it's not surrounded by that same sick, grimy atmosphere that Last House possesses. Now, as far as all the guts that you see in this movie there in that scene that they're just throwing around and putting on top of the body, those are all real internal organs that they got down at the fucking slaughterhouse. Roger Watkins actually, the original cut of this movie begins with lots of real slaughterhouse footage. And just a brief bit of that is still in this cut that everyone knows. You know, you see the part towards the beginning of this movie where the cow's hanging upside down and the the slaughterhouse worker cuts the throat and you see all the blood spilling out onto the ground and it's real steamy. There's steam coming up from all the hot blood. According to Roger, I mean, he went into this slaughterhouse and he told him he was making some kind of agricultural educational type video. He told him something like that. And so they let him come in and film them, you know, butchering cows. And when he was there, he shot a ton of sickening footage with these cows being cut open, all the blood spilling around and all the muck. And originally, in the original cut of Last House, when it was under the title of Cuckoo Clocks of Hell, he had a lot of this slaughterhouse footage in there, but evidently it repulsed everybody that watched it. They thought, nah, this is too much. It just sickened people, turned them off. And you know, I don't blame it. It is a turnoff watching a cow get cut open and watching their blood fall on the ground. It's not a fun thing to watch. You know, it kind of reminds me of that scene in Necromantic when the rabbit gets killed there on camera. You know, that stuff's not fun to watch. It is repellent. It puts you off. So I can see why they cut that down. I mean, just the bit that they have in there now is enough to add to the overall aura of queasiness and sickness that this movie, you know, just has in abundance. So Roger already had gone down there and shot slaughterhouse footage. So yeah, he was able to go there and get, you know, buckets of guts and everything, and they kept those on ice so they wouldn't start to smell and stink and all that. They kept all those guts on ice all the way up into the scene where they go to pull them out, you know, up on when they're doing the disembowelment scene. Luckily, the meat hadn't, all those organs hadn't started to rot, because that kind of reminds me, you know, when they shot Texas Chainsaw Massacre and they were in that real hot house when they were filming that dinner scene and it was a marathon shooting session. We've all heard the stories about how the meat in there began to rot and the smell was making people sick. Well, luckily on the set of Last House on Dead End Street, when they filmed that scene, and I think he says on the commentary tracker in an interview that scene only took a couple hours, maybe 2, 3, 4 hours. So they didn't have any issues with the meat making everybody, you know, vomit. So that's good. The overall look of the movie is pale and utterly devoid of color, giving it a grim feeling of soullessness, which is perfect because this really is a grand work of hate, rage, spite, and every other vile emotion inherent to the human condition. All of these feelings spill out across the film. Watching this movie is like walking through a hellish nightmare. It may be off-putting to some, but if you have a bleak sensibility or a certain amount of darkness in your heart, then this movie can really speak to you in a weird kind of way. Like I said before, Roger Watkins is absolutely perfect in this movie as Terry Hawkins. And it's a shame that Roger didn't have any interest in going into acting. You know, after this, most of his work was in the adult film industry. That's what he directed things like Her Name Was Lisa, Corruption, Midnight Heat, and on, you know, stuff in that realm. And the only 2 horror things that he did, you know, pure horror, exploitation type stuff, was Last House on Dead End Street and Shadows of the Mind. I would have liked to have seen him direct more horror flicks and also star in more horror movies, because he really cultivated a certain type of cool anti-hero image in this movie. One thing right off the bat that you can draw a direct parallel to is David Hess's Krug character in Last House on the Left, or his character Alex in House on the Edge of the Park. He has that imposing kind of tough swagger to him, kind of exudes a sick sort of bad guy charisma. Roger Watkins had that, man. He really did. I would have liked to have seen him play the heavy in more movies of this nature. Would have been a delight, and what a real sad thing that just never came to be. And from everything I've read, he just really had no interest in acting. That just wasn't his thing. He wanted to write and direct. He wasn't as interested in the acting part of the thing. So it's sad. We really missed out as far as that's concerned. And I'll tell you what, over the years I just began to appreciate this movie more and more, especially when I got the Barrel DVD in 2002. You know, like I said before, when I watched the bootleg tape in the 90s, it didn't sink in yet. And you know, I wasn't mature enough to kind of have a certain type of sensibility to where I could appreciate the darkness of this film and the artistic aspects of it. I didn't, you know, that stuff didn't click with me yet because I didn't have the maturity level. But when I got the Barrel DVD and watched it more and watched more of the extras and learned more about the underpinnings of it and how it came to be and the whole meaning behind the movie, it took on a life of its own, and it became one of my favorites. You know, this is a movie that I care a lot about, and I wish I could have met Roger Watkins. I really wish I could have met the guy and got a picture with him and had him sign. I would have loved to have had him sign this DVD or have him sign a still, anything. It would have been a great moment. I really wish that would have happened. Unfortunately, I never made it to a convention that he was at before he passed away, and he died in 2007, and I still remember when he died. I remember exactly where I was when I read it. I was on, this is back in the days where people used MySpace, and I had MySpace on, and when I read he died, I was really sad. That really bummed me out. And right around the same time, another one of my favorite filmmakers passed away, Bob Clark, director of Black Christmas, Death Dream, Children Shouldn't Play with Dead Things. You know, Bob Clark and Roger Watkins were two of my absolute favorite filmmakers. And so I was really bummed out around that time. You know, I'm a musician and everything, and I had just done a demo recording with a certain amount of songs on it, and I actually dedicated that recording to both of them. I dedicated it to Roger Watkins and Bob Clark because that was just a real bummer. And I wish those guys were still around. Now, the score to this movie is amazing. Sections of this score sound like a choir of dead souls singing at the world's funeral. It's just the epitome of doom. There are arches to this score that just sound blacker than the most evil music you can imagine. It's just primed and filled with evil atmosphere. It's bleak and very much fitting to the film. And, you know, just imagine just dead, tortured souls trapped in a hellish purgatory. I mean, it's just, if you were listening to this music separate from the film, you would get dire, morbid imagery circling around in your brain in no time. That's how good it is. And the crazy thing about it is, this music wasn't created purposely for this film. No, this is just needle drop stuff, you know, library stock music that Roger went down and bought to use in the movie. You know, the same thing that George Romero was so fond of doing in his early work. And that's what's so cool about it. And that's where the genius lies. You know, even though there was no composer putting this music to the film, or Roger wasn't doing it himself, regardless of that, the genius was finding the right music cues to put to these images, and he found the perfect music to use for this movie. Just from the moment alone where you hear that decayed, rotting heartbeat on the opening credits, and then all the other stuff I talked about that's through the movie. It's perfect. Works great. As far as nudity goes in this movie, well, Nancy Palmer, Palmer's wife, she really enjoys getting slapped around, and there's one really sordid scene where she's just got a top on, she's got panties on, she gets down on her knees in a living room in front of a big crowd of degenerates, and they're sitting around laughing while this hunchback dude stands behind her with a bullwhip. He just lays into her and beats her across her back, and I'll tell you what, in real life, if she was getting beat with a fucking bullwhip like that, she'd be down after one strike. But she sits there and she's kind of moaning with her mouth open as this hunchback prick beats her. So that's a kind of a sleazy scene, and I can see where Roger was going with having something like that in the movie. He needed something right there to kind of shock people and kind of tied them over until that last 30 minutes or so when the real horror kicks in. So he needed some sleaze in there, so I understand that. It's a weird scene for sure. There's also a long bubble bath scene where this chick is rubbing suds all over her ample bosom, and that scene is shot in black and white for a little bit of added artsiness, you know, because Roger Watkins really had that artistic flair to him. But yeah, this movie has a few sex scenes, and it has some nudity and everything, has plenty of sleaze, but it's all shot in an ugly way, in a very primal, gritty, dirty way. This stuff isn't erotic, it isn't arousing, it's more, you know, it fits the tone of this movie in that it's just really ugly. It's not something that makes you feel good. But hey, if you want a movie with nudity and sleaze, you did come to the right place when you put this movie in, you sick fucking pervert, because it does deliver in that aspect as well. I need to add before I finish this movie, if you've ever seen on YouTube or on the DVD, you know that little TV spot for Last House on Dead End Street where it shows the girl from behind and, you know, she's got like fucking pigtails or something, and then her head turns around and it's screaming. You know, that little weird TV spot? Well, that was originally shot for Shadows of the Mind. And if you watch Shadows of the Mind, you can see where it would pertain to that movie because it looks like a character in that movie. And yeah, so funny enough, they took that little thing that Roger shot and they tied it in with Last House on Dead End Street. So that's kind of amusing. But I'll tell you what, guys, I think I've said enough about Last House on Dead End Street for one night. What we're going to do now is I want you to click on the second video here. I got another video for Shadows of the Mind, and we're going to continue this little Roger Watkins marathon, if you will. So, like I said, Last House on Dead End Street, undisputed fucking classic. It knocks out all comers. It's a great movie. And yeah, guys, now that you're done watching this one, I want you to hurry up and I want you to click on that Shadows of the Mind review and analysis. And we'll take it from there. So, I'll see you over there.